good to go for the work session?
We're good.
All right. So we're continuing a series of, this is a meeting of the Planning Commission. It's January 10th at 5:30. We are conducting a work session first. No action can be taken during a work session. It's for general discussion purposes. And tonight we're considering the land use code updates. The land use code is following on the heels of adoption of the comprehensive plan in August. The land use code is the first next step in implementing the recommendations and vision of the comprehensive plan. We've been presenting information to the Planning Commission in work sessions each month for an hour or so each month, and we've discussed a variety of topics, including the general provisions, so all of the kind of procedural type of matters for what is a land use code. We've presented application procedures, so what steps are required for applications of various types for land subdivisions, zone change requests, variances, site plans, things of that nature. We've discussed landscape and irrigation standards. We've presented both some draft, and everything has been draft. I should mention, everything is still subject to hearings and final approvals. But we have presented draft language for standards, and so the regulations regarding landscaping and irrigation, and also supplemented by a landscape and irrigation design manual, which would be advisory and would be a complement or supplement to the regulations. We've discussed at several meetings the land use tables. That is kind of three parts. We've talked about zone district descriptions. We've talked about definitions of land uses, and of course the table, which identifies by zone district which land uses are acceptable to be located in those zones, either as a use by right or a permitted use, which you usually see as a P, the letter P, or a conditional, which you usually see as the letter C in those columns. Conditional uses meaning those which are defined as, those uses which are defined as requiring additional review and consideration prior to that use being established in that zone district. Tonight, we're going to expand on the discussion for the land use tables. What we've included in your agenda packet, and the packet was published on the website, the information is available to the public. There's a kind of a clean formatted draft of the land use table. What we did was we took out all of the old language from the existing code that was kind of held as a placeholder. We still have all that information. It hasn't gone anywhere. We just didn't show it in this table to kind of make it easier to read. And we consolidated some of the notes so that what you see is a kind of cleaned up, easy to read 2-page version of that land use table. It's still a draft, it's still up for discussion, but hopefully we're moving in the direction where we've got some consensus to make a recommendation to the Board of Trustees for what would be actually incorporated into the land use code if finally adopted. Also tonight, we wanted to talk about the next step related to land uses, and that is our use standards. Use standards, which Reese Wilson is here present tonight to lead that discussion. The use standards kind of further define the parameters under which the various uses, when allowed in a zone district, what's required of them to operate there. I don't want to take all of Reese's thunder, so I'll leave it at that for now, and he'll introduce it a little bit further for that discussion. And the last item on our agenda for discussion tonight is the results of the online questionnaire that we did a couple of weeks ago. It was for, it had some questions related to the downtown neighborhoods zone district. We heard a lot in the comprehensive plan about the desire to kind of preserve the historic nature and character of the downtown neighborhoods. And so that vision was kind of identified in the comprehensive plan, along with another prevalent theme, which was to allow property owners to come to the town and request changes if they desired to do so. So seeing that kind of the balance in the comprehensive plan process of a desire to make investments in private property and possibly make changes, coupled with we need to preserve the character and intent of the downtown neighborhoods. We posed a series of questions to the public, asking for further insight into what that character should look like. So we asked some questions about what we'd heard in the comprehensive plan, that some additional limited business uses could be possible. We asked for clarification on what types of uses that might include from a business standpoint. We also heard that preserving the character and the architecture of these historic neighborhoods was important. So we asked some questions about what is the historic nature, what is the character that we're trying to preserve, so that we can incorporate these elements into our use standards for that zone district. So when any new use or redevelopment, if an owner comes and says, I want to redevelop my home to be a business use, we've got it clearly defined up front what the expectations are for that to happen. It's important to have the regulations in place before the request comes in, so there's a clear procedure and a clear path for what is allowed and how they accomplish that. So that's what the Downtown Neighborhoods Questionnaire was attempting to get some further clarifications on, and we have the results of that questionnaire included in the packet. And Jen Gardner from Logan Simpson is going to be on the call here in a few moments, and she'll help kind of lead that conversation on the downtown questionnaire. So that's a high-level overview of kind of where we've been and what we're discussing tonight. Are there any questions on what we're considering, or past steps or future steps? All right, not seeing any. We'll go ahead and proceed. The first item that we can kind of dive into a little deeper was the draft land use table. Is there, and we cleaned this up for you, as I mentioned. It's still color coded. I put those colors on there. I'm colorblind, makes no sense to me, but the color windows on Excel said that they were acceptable. So my apologies if anyone has any trouble reading it, but in general, it's broken up by residential land uses, commercial land uses, industrial land uses, and then miscellaneous or public. And those are also outlined by a thick black border. So hopefully that helps you identify those kind of categories.
I didn't see marijuana listed anywhere in there.
You're right. That's not added yet. That is something that we're going to add to this table. At the time the draft table was initially prepared, we hadn't had that conversation regarding marijuana uses yet, because there was a ballot issue in front of the voters. But you're right, we need to add that in there. The referendum or the ballot issue that was referred to the voters and was approved contemplated that marijuana establishments would be allowed only in the C3 zone district. So we will update this table per the voting of the residents of Wellington. So marijuana establishments will be included with C3 as a permitted zone district. Thanks for mentioning that, Bert. So there's not much more for me to explain regarding the table. I think we have talked about it a couple of times. So really at this point, we're just looking for, any feedback. I know the prior format was pretty difficult to read. So this is a little simpler. Does anyone have any thoughts, ideas, or suggestions regarding the various uses and which zone districts they're currently identified as being permitted or conditional? Again, this is a draft and we can continue to make updates throughout the process, but this is a good time to have those discussions if there were any questions on how these various uses interact with the code.
So, Mr. Bird, I had some questions because we heard from, was it Mr. Gabbert from one of the local churches about sort of where their desires to be based on traffic counts and visibility. And, I'm looking under the religious land use section there. And again, it's permitted in all these residential, which from his statements he suggested that because of their community engagement and a lot of programming with children, that oftentimes they were not necessarily seen as the best neighbors by some. And so I was just wondering if staff and Logan Simpsons had looked to that input, or whether we've reached out to other churches to see what their thoughts are regarding that. Because it was I was thinking about it one way. His comments really changed my perspective. So I was just curious to know if we'd heard any more feedback from those stakeholders.
Yeah, good point, Trustee Whitehouse. So one real quick correction. I hate doing this, but it was just for clarity. It was Pastor Russ Brewer from Wellington Community Church that spoke at the last Planning Commission meeting and shared some thoughts on what his perspective as a pastor was for identifying potential future locations for religious land uses. And to answer your questions, we do think that what our current code currently allows is not broad enough for the religious land uses, and that's why we've added the residential zone districts to be permitted uses. Some of the things that Pastor Brewer talked about were in large part the same things that a lot of commercial businesses look for when looking for site locations. So that perspective is well respected, and we do still include churches as uses allowable within the commercial zone districts. We still believe it's a good practice to include churches as a possible use in residential zone districts. We understand from Pastor Brewer's comments that churches don't want to be kind of stuck, for lack of a better word, buried in a neighborhood where they don't have the visibility. And I don't think any of our existing residential subdivisions would really accommodate that anyhow. It's really for future residential properties that if a church were to approach a developer that had multiple residential lots, that church might be able to acquire multiple lots that fit their scale and sizing needs. And most of those locations, or most of the new developments, would have appropriate locations along along a major roadway that meets the visibility needs and other things of the churches. So we recognize that there are some limitations regarding lot size, access, and some other things for residential zone districts, but we don't think it's appropriate to eliminate religious land uses from the residential categories. We would tend to defer to a site plan review process where lights, traffic, some of those other factors that may not be completely compatible with residential uses can be evaluated for separation, buffers, screening, some other mitigating techniques. Schools are often in the same conversation. It's typical to have schools in or near a residential zone district, and the same lighting, traffic, noise, kids playing on playgrounds, those other concerns all come up with schools as well. So we're trying to be cognizant of all of those various aspects and make sure that we're providing enough opportunities for religious land uses to find suitable locations within Wellington. Reese, was there anything that you wanted to add to the conversation on religious land uses?
Yeah, greetings all to everybody in Wellington. Yeah, so what you'll probably have to do to kind of get towards doing those mitigating factors like you're talking about, Cody, is we might have to change the definition of religious land use and match it towards something like an assembly use, so we can, propose some regulations. Because what we can't do is we can't have, we just can't have a bunch of standards under religious land use and then not match it up with another assembly type use, because then we would be in violation of RLUIPA in the First Amendment, which would, come with a bunch of lawsuits if a church wanted to, pose a suit. So I think what's going to happen is if you're trying to go down that route, we're going to have to maybe change the definition of religious land use and maybe do something like a religious assembly or something. And then have a separate assembly use, convention assembly hall use, and then have similar standards with those. Because as long as you kind of match it with another assembly use and they're kind of married together, the courts have kind of been all right with that. So that's something we'd have to consider.
Thanks, Reese. And I want to point out too, while we're on the topic, I mean, there are other factors that come into not just religious land uses, but the assembly uses as well that Reese mentioned. And actually, to be honest, a lot of uses. A lot of our zone districts don't have lot sizes large enough to accommodate some of the uses, including required landscaping, required off-street parking requirements. Some zone districts just don't provide adequate opportunity for larger assembly uses. And so similar to that part of that reasoning for not including the downtown commercial core for those land use types is largely based on size and availability of off-street parking. It's just not practical to meet all those requirements for a new use proposed. But that being said, I think that there's still some thinking that we can do to better integrate a variety of uses, because we know not all assemblies are the same size or off-street parking needs. So there may be some other parameters to consider, like maximum square foot sizes for assembly uses in the zone district that's commensurate with the amount of available off-street parking. So there's a couple of different angles to look at there, and we'll continue to look at those options. Is there any other feedback on that particular topic, or we're open to hearing ideas, thoughts, and questions?
Hey, it's Linda. I just have a quick question on this. And I feel like this is kind of a slippery slope a little bit. There's a trend going on right now for home churches or house church, where worship happens, in people's homes, things like that. And I mean, it would be pretty difficult to say, hey, you can't do that at your house, because anybody can either have, Sunday brunch or people to come over and worship or whatever that assembly is at their home at any point in time. But is there anything with that, if a church starts up and wants to be at home, that we need to be aware of? I feel like that there's not much we can do, but I don't know, just question.
Yeah, good thought, Linda. Reese, have you had any particular similar type of situations come up in some of the other communities you've worked in?
No, but that's a common concern, because you really can't, prohibit people from worshiping, especially on their own home, in their own lot, in their own lot. But you are kind of handcuffed in what you can do. I mean, typically what would happen is that the HOA would kind of come in and regulate that situation. But a city, a municipality would probably be a little hands-off. It's a little bit different when HOA is involved, because, it's a private third party as opposed to a public entity prohibiting place of worship and where you can and can't worship. So that's about all I have on that particular question.
Yeah, I think it would be difficult, unless you had 100 to 300 people coming into your neighborhood every week. If you had 20 people or so coming to your home, yeah, that's a very different feeling. So
yeah, and there's also enforcement that you can do with that. So it's a little bit reactionary instead of proactive. But if there's 300 people in a single family home, or 100 people in a single family home, well, that would be grounds to get your, building official out there, your fire department out there, and they can cite them till the cows come home for not complying with International Building Code and the various fire hazard safeties and all that. So that's a way to regulate that. It's not proactive, it's reactionary. I know when I was a municipal planner in a Dallas suburb, there were home churches like that, and our fire department and enforcement team was pretty active, because people complained about, they were blocking ingress and egress along the street. They were parked in front of fire hydrants, and there's just too many people in the building. So that's a way you can address it, but.
well, I'm definitely not saying I want to
Mhm.
you know, be that block of people that get together. And I guess I'm glad to hear what you said, that, you know, really it is kind of off limits a little bit to, you know, our regulations, you know, and yes, it goes just on public safety. So, all right, that helps. Thank you.
No problem.
Yeah, and you're right on, Linda. The intent of the regulations is not to prohibit or restrict people from worshiping in their own way. It's, as Reese pointed out, there are some very basic life safety issues that need to be addressed for any use, regardless of the reason for assembly. And those would be the things that we would be looking at if needed. The other side of this too is, and part of what we set out to do with the land use code update was to make sure that there are ample opportunities in various zone districts to meet, you know, any type of, you know, religious land use or assembly use new location siting. Part of the way to combat the popping up of uses that are incompatible in a residential zone district is to make sure that there are plenty of places for them to locate in appropriate locations. So we wanted to definitely open up the opportunities for new uses to find appropriate locations. Any other questions or thoughts on the topic?
So if I understand that right, we're not attempting to do anything, regulate any of that. What we can do in our own homes.
No, there are some basic provisions for home occupations and some other factors.
Yeah, but we're just talking about people getting together in own homes. I mean, it could be a birthday party, anything like that. We're talking, you know, people
Right,
coming over.
no.
We're not trying to regulate any of that.
No, not outside of the basic life safety, public health, safety, welfare type of matters, like the example Reese provided. If you've got people parking in front of fire hydrants every day or every other day, that's a different issue to address, not the use, but the safety issues.
Okay.
Are there other topics in the use table that warrant some discussion?
Yeah, Mr. Bird, I was just looking at the wireless telecommunications facility, and if you go across all the zoning there is nothing indicated. Is that partly due that my understanding is a local municipality has there's not much they can do because of both state and federal statute about communications that I don't know, is that why there isn't anything shown in that category?
Partially, and good observation. I failed to mention that in my introduction. There's nothing identified currently because we haven't really had that conversation as with regards to what types of wireless facilities and where. There's a variety of infrastructure types for wireless facilities, and some are reasonably located within commercial zone districts. There's others that, if done appropriately, could be located within residential zone districts. And we just need to have that conversation at a little bit finer level of detail. This was something that Reese and I have talked about, and we know it still needs to be filled in. So, but currently it's blank. It will have something included in the future, and we'll bring that up at a future meeting.
Thank you.
Thank you, Commissioner Whitehouse.
Hey, Cody, on tonight's packet, I see all the kind of the cleaned up descriptions of all the, I guess, the topics or the proposed uses in the draft table. For multifamily, it's number 4.03.31 in the packet. Where did the 12 come from? Is that something we just have written into our municipal code? Is that a standard that comes from outside of the town of Wellington? Where did the 12 come from?
You're referring to the 12 units? In the
Yes, correct. Sorry. The multifamily dwelling shall not exceed 12 units under that heading.
Okay. So a lot of that conversation comes back from the comprehensive plan and with desired densities of land use types. That was kind of the basis for that initial concept. We can define it further in the land use code. but that was the kind of the basis for it. One thing to keep in mind too is that, and these are all still drafts, so we can do some more research and we can update them as desired. When it comes to multifamily, that's typically not, your townhomes, which would be single family attached units. Multifamily is usually, apartment complexes or condominiums. And so, 12 may not be the right number for that. Many times that's your highest density is your multifamily because it includes apartment complexes and condominiums. So that's something that we can definitely take a look at and we can expand on it if needed.
Okay, so single family attached would then cover duplexes, triplexes, fourplexes, your smaller density up to 12. Or I guess
perhaps it
They're all-
would include townhomes, and the distinction is often in the building code, that single family attached is referring to a standalone unit that has a party wall from the ground up to the sky, where you can define this is the limits of mine and what is yours, so that it's a standalone dwelling unit that doesn't rely on the other units for access, hallways, corridors, mechanical systems, things of that nature.
Okay.
Each unit is a standalone unit. They just share a wall.
Okay. Okay, perfect. That clears up a lot of questions for me. Thank you.
Yeah, you're welcome.
Hey, I see temporary and accessory as two of the other options, but I don't see that we have any classified as those two. Could you tell me more about those and if we intend on using them?
Yeah, so that's a great question, Commissioner Kinney, and I will start that, and then I'll hand it over to Reese if he wants to add anything further to it. Temporary uses and accessory uses are in addition to a principal use. So a detached garage is accessory to your home, which is your principal structure. A garden shed is accessory to your home. So those are the accessory uses. Those are generally allowed in most zone districts. And I think accessory uses, accessory building, accessory use are identified in the land use table. And it's largely permitted in all the residential zones, some in the commercial zones. We can take a look at that further if needed. Temporary uses are things that may be there for a short time. So a good example would be like an outdoor display for a special event, or we're putting up a tent for additional seating for some special event, and the tent or canopy is going to go away when we're done. It's there for a limited amount of time, and then it goes away and the site goes back to just the principal use. So we do need to define that in the code. If there are, there are some certain zoning, setbacks and other considerations that need to be factored in for those types of uses. And our goal would be to define what those are, so that anyone applying for those uses knows very clearly what is allowed and what things they might need to consider. I hope that answers the general question. And then Reese, was there anything that you were looking at that specifically needs to be discussed relative to accessory or temporary uses?
No, it just comes down to like the preference on how you want to see it in the table. You can, if you want to see it with an A, or if you want to see it with the T to indicate temporary uses that are allowed or accessory uses that are allowed, or if you just want to have a P for that accessory use is permitted. So it just comes down to that. But accessory uses are something that's always a part of use standards. So are temporary uses. So that's nothing abnormal here. I'm pretty sure there'll be some more that might come up that y'all might want to see included in the accessory use or temporary use section, and we'll make the accommodation for it. So,
yeah, I wonder if it would be nice to be able to see them in the table, and I see it as a row. So that's, I guess, between the two things, that's where I'm confused. So I see accessory use is a row, but then I also would assume that I would see P, comma T in a bunch of the individual cells.
Yeah, so it just depends on how y'all want to see it displayed. So usually in the tables that we prepare, what we have is we'll remove like, so how you see in the table, it says accessory use, you see a P, right, on different columns. What we'll do is we would remove the accessory use from that part of the table, and we put it at the bottom of the table under its own section, where it'll be they'll have its own running header that'll say accessory uses, and it would label each type of accessory use. So you'd have like accessory building, an accessory structure, accessory dwelling unit, all types of accessory retail sales, and then it would have either the A marking an allowed accessory use or a P for permitted accessory use, and the same thing would go with like the temporary uses. So that might be something that might communicate that a little bit better instead of what's currently showed.
That makes more sense to me. I don't know if I'm seeing a thumbs up from Tim, but that would make a lot more sense to me when I was looking at it, when I look at it. So I think I would prefer that.
Okay.
Well, one of the things that, I mean, I think this table is, I mean, obviously it's been changed and condensed, and the thing is, if we can provide clear information for people reviewing it, again, it'd be more efficient for them, and then fewer phone calls to go, well, I don't quite understand what this means, and you have the same conversation multiple times. So there might be, again, some value in Commissioner Kinney's suggestion.
That's great. Thanks for those ideas. We'll definitely take those in and bring something back for you. Great thoughts. Other thoughts on the table? Are we getting closer to the right mix of permitted uses within these zone districts? Again, we can come back to it at any point during this process, and particularly as you dive into the use standards that Reese is going to present next, you'll start to see how various things kind of push and pull and are related in a bigger web of regulations. When you change one thing, then it kind of creates a ripple effect that you need to evaluate, and sometimes it results in a change to where those uses are allowed. So we can certainly come back to it as questions might come up. Any other high-level thoughts on the table? Okay, then I'm going to hand it over to Reese to let him talk about the use standards. If any of the planning commissioners do have additional thoughts or questions regarding the table of uses, feel free to reach out to me. Send me an email. We can talk about those particular questions. Reese, do you want to introduce the use standards?
Sure thing, I'll do that. So last time in December, I was there in person with Mark White, and we were talking about uses and specific uses and kind of use standards. And so now we're kind of following up on that. We've delivered a draft to staff for a lot of these different types of uses. It's included in the packet. So what I'm going to do is I'm just going to talk about how this document is laid out, and kind of touch base back on some of those use standards we talked about previously in last month's meeting. So we'll just start with the format of this. So like the format of this chapter is showing like how you read the use table, the organization of the different types of use regulations, what to do if something is not a listed use, all those sorts of things. So that's 4.01 of this document. Pretty straightforward stuff in my opinion. And then 4.02 is where the use table will be housed. It'll show all the allowances and permittances. They'll have a use standards column that correlates to whatever part it is in this document. So that's 4.02. And then 4.03 is all the meat and potatoes of those use standards we talked about last month. So those include those spacing standards where, a liquor store can't be 500 feet from a school, something like that. You'll see, size requirements. So if you're in a commercial area, you can only have this you have to have this much of building square footage, or you can't exceed this much building square footage. If you do, that requires a conditional use permit. So you'll see some of that in here. You'll see some screening techniques to mitigate for some of those adverse effects that certain establishments may have, abutting residential areas, or institutional areas. And then you also see some, I know there's been some discussions about particular land uses over the past few months, and tried to make some or propose some use regulations that could address those concerns. So you'll see certain types of uses like financial institutions and their drive-through accesses and ATMs, that kind of things included in this section. You'll see, breweries and brew pubs and all that stuff, and different types of size requirements, hours of operation, spacing standards in certain districts. So you'll see that there. And then after you get done reading through, section 4.03, the specific use standards for all those particular uses are those accessory use structure standards and all that in its own section, and kind of talks about the difference between accessory use and the primary principal use, and the process to get an approved accessory use. And then the next section, 4.05, does the same thing for temporary uses. So that's pretty much the layout and the organization of this chapter. We also know that this is not a full approved draft or anything like that. We know there's going to be comments. We know there's going to be some concerns. There's going to be some suggestions. Some might think it's a little bit too onerous to a developer. Some might think it's not onerous enough. There might be other uses that need to have specific regulations. There might be some of these uses might not even need regulations. So we understand that there's going to be some changes to occur, and if you see something that's eye-popping and you're like, whoa, no, not here in Wellington, just let us know and we'll make the adjustment. No hard feelings, no nothing here, no ego here, and we'll make those changes to best suit the town of Wellington. There's also in this draft, you'll see a couple of blank uses. Those are those uses that we're going to keep fine tuning. Those are like the wireless communications, the religious land uses, those sexually oriented businesses, those types of uses that we're going to get a little bit more in depth with, and do a little bit more research, and we'll run it by, White and Smith. We have 3 attorneys on staff, and we'll run it through some of our legal people to make sure everything complies with federal and state statutes as we keep moving forward with this process. So you'll see that in there as well.
Great. Thanks, Reese, for the introduction. There's a lot of detailed material in your packet on these land use standards. And I know you've had a relatively short time to start that review. Are there any questions, high level, regarding the orientation, the organization of the use standards and what they're intended to achieve?
Well, I spent a few hours going through this today, and it looks pretty comprehensive. It looks pretty, clear, whether some of the titles, get tuned up. I was reading some of the footnotes, and they're like, well, is a grocery store the same as a supermarket, or, can certain categories be rolled together? I think that's stuff that's all can be fine tuned, but it seems like it's moving along. Have you received much in the way of public feedback at all? I know it's very premature at this point, but.
Yeah, so good question on the public feedback. We have not received a lot of public comments, particularly regarding these draft use standards, as they were just in the packet Friday. So there hasn't been a lot of time for the public to react on that particular piece. We are going to put some of these sections on the land use code website so that the public can kind of begin to look at these sections that have been discussed and have been drafted. But the general process, we've not received a lot of feedback. So we're kind of continuing on. There are opportunities for residents to comment on the information on the land use code update page of the town's website. There's a Google Doc. It's a link that they can click on and provide feedback, questions, comments, suggestions, just any general public comment. We want to hear it and understand kind of what the needs are. But to date, we haven't received a lot of that feedback. We did put out the online questionnaire I mentioned earlier to get specific feedback on the downtown neighborhoods, and Jen Gardner's with us now, and we'll present that here shortly. But we're trying to, in a couple of ways, to get some specific feedback on some of the topics that have come up that had questions around them. So we would love to hear more feedback, and there'll be public hearings and additional opportunities for the public to weigh in, but to date, we have not received much in way of public comment.
I have a couple things as I was looking at this more focusedly. I don't know if I'd be a big fan of having a pawn shop downtown. I don't know if it's available in other commercial zoning, I think that'd be fine. I don't know if a pawn shop would look great downtown. Secondly, what's an example of indoor recreation? What
Could be a bowling alley, could be others. There are indoor mini golf facilities.
I see.
So, and I don't know if there's any other, that's the general context. There could be a lot of things related to that, but then that's the general nature.
Okay, thanks.
On
I was
the
thinking like axe throwing. I was like, that would be cool to have downtown, but that's probably more of like a bar. So anyway, sorry.
Yeah, I think that there's different ways to approach that. And maybe tonight's not or at least maybe we've got a little limited time before the regular meeting starts, but maybe we can dive into that deeper following the regular meeting. It really could depend on how detailed we want to get with regards to what's important to regulate and what's the public interest in regulating it. Bars and taverns often have dartboards. Is that indoor recreation? Usually
That's
not.
right.
Usually it's kind of ancillary to the principal use, and you don't really much about it. It's usually geared more towards, are you generating site traffic? Are there other factors that need to be considered for that particular indoor recreational use that's different from the bar and tavern use? So we can define it differently, but I think in general, it's kind of targeted more at like the bowling alleys, indoor mini golf, and things of that nature, as opposed to the ancillary uses that might be associated with the principal use.
Okay.
That's a high level answer, and we can talk more details on what the commission might recommend regarding those here in a few minutes.
Thanks.
So again, there's a lot of information, and I'm sure there are more questions that the Planning Commission has. I do just want to point out at 6:15, our regular meeting agenda is scheduled to begin at 6:30. It's a pretty brief agenda. We've got minutes, we've got election of officers for this year, and we have our presentation by the town attorney regarding some considerations for Planning Commission membership. But I believe that to be a relatively short regular meeting, so we could absolutely reconvene in work session after that. That in mind, I think it might be helpful, Jen Gardner with Logan Simpson, if we could at least present or begin presenting the downtown questionnaire. That way, anyone from the public
You know about it?
might they'd be able to at least hear that, and then they can decide if they want to stick around for additional discussion after the regular meeting.
Perfect. Cody, would you like me to share my screen and share the results of the questionnaire?
I think that'd be great. Yeah.
Okay. Fantastic. Let me Let me get that shared here. Sorry, I'm having a formatting issue here.
It's
Kinda
kind of
lost
tough
my
to
screen.
get used to the online format again. I was hoping we'd be done with it, but here we are.
I know. All right, there we go. Okay, share screen. I agree with you. I feel a little clunky here trying to share the right document. All right, can everybody see that?
Yeah, we can see it, Jen.
Okay, perfect. So for those of the public that are on, or those of you that just received this document last Friday, I just want to quickly overview. This cover page just kind of describes what the purpose of the questionnaire was, how many people took it, how it was advertised, and what we learned from it. So this questionnaire was specific to the downtown neighborhoods. The purpose of the questionnaire really was to build on the comprehensive plan efforts. So there was some imagery that was used in the comprehensive plan to start to define what the downtown neighborhoods might want to look like and what those densities might need to be. We wanted to go a little bit deeper to see if we needed to develop some specific design standards for this area to ensure that development is right-sized, any infill or new development is right-sized to the area, because it's a very, very sensitive area with and very different than a lot of the rest of the neighborhoods in Wellington. So we had about 112 community members respond to the survey or to the questionnaire. About 67% of those were community members outside of the downtown neighborhoods, and about 21% were community members in the downtown neighborhood. So I think that was actually a pretty decent representation. It was open for almost a month. We had it open at the beginning of December and closed it right before Christmas. And there was a link placed on the town's website, advertised through Facebook, Nextdoor, Instagram, and the table tents and coasters that are throughout town. So what we learned, and I'm just gonna kind of skip over that part and go into these results because I think that really helps us understand what we learned. There was a welcome page, a little bit of background and context to highlight the area. But the first question that we asked was, these were the images that were included in the comprehensive plan. And we asked if they were still, kind of still relevant and which ones seemed to be most applicable to this downtown neighborhood area. So you'll see images 5, 4, 6, and 7. So these first two, this one right here, and then this one here. So you see a little mix of single-story residential and some two-story residential seem to be kind of the top choices for what people thought were representative of the downtown neighborhoods. We get a little bit deeper into, this is just a second type of chart that gives you the full percentages on that first question. We included, as you can see, we included a graphic just to help people understand the different terminology that we were using throughout the document. There were some write-in answers, and I won't go through these right now, but basically just talking about, low density, really capture that single family downtown neighborhood kind of experience. This is the old town area, but we don't want to be Fort Collins and Boulder. Kind of that craftsman cottage bungalow style type look is kind of what we heard through this comment section. And then we got into roof sizes or roof styles, and we asked if how important standardized roof styles are. And as you can see, this purple, not important. So what we took from this was that not important. The roof styles are not as important as other elements of architecture. But out of the roof styles, we asked which ones would be most appropriate to downtown: the gable, hip, and cross hip. So if we go back to this image, kind of your standard gable, hip, cross hip. And cross gabled, I thought it was as an answer in there, but I was told later that question or that option must have gotten dropped off the questionnaire, and a couple of people wrote in they would have chosen cross gabled as well. So kind of your standard roof forms were the preferred options. The next question was, how important is building height? And as you can see from this answer, people were allowed to choose any of the options, or no, sorry, back up. This was the how important are they, and the next one is any option. So we kind of have a smorgasbord. So there was a pretty good selection that said not important or moderately important, and then a few that said fairly important and very important. So this one wasn't as telling to us whether building height was important or not. But I will say the next question asks about what would the desired maximum height for downtown neighborhoods be? And we're seeing 1-story with improved attic space or 2-story with improved attic space. So as you can see in the first images, people chose a couple 1-stories and a couple 2-stories, but we're hearing through this that 2-story with an improved attic space, which almost looks like a 3-story, is kind of it got the most votes anyway. So we're okay from what we're gathering from this to have that 2-story with improved attic space or 1-story with improved attic space, which kind of looks like a 2-story. So I thought that was very, very interesting. How important are front porches? Fairly important to very important was kind of where we landed. So it seemed to me that this was a little bit more telling than even the building height or roof form question, that kind of having these elements of porches seemed to be a little bit more important than some of those other elements. Looking at architectural styles, Victorian, craftsman, and farmhouse were the top 3 choices, and that's Victorian, craftsman, and farmhouse right in here, which again is consistent with the imagery that we've kind of seen as the priority throughout this project. And then this section, actually, I'm not going to go into detail on it, but the gist of it is that single family homes are a definite yes for a use allowed in the downtown neighborhoods. And then duplexes, townhomes, kind of a, maybe with some conditions, they might be okay if they had the right, the right situation. Multifamily dwellings was a hands down no. And then looking in, oh yeah.
I'm sorry to interrupt you. I think it might be worth mentioning for this particular question how the question was asked. The questionnaire included a variety of use types that could be located within the downtown neighborhoods. And the question was, should this be allowed as a use by right? Should it not be allowed? Or could it be allowed if it meets certain conditions that kind of mitigate any adverse impacts in a sense? And so those are the columns that you're seeing for the responses, with the darker shading indicating the higher percentages of response. So I hope that kind of helps frame the results of this table that you're looking at. Some of these responses are not the responses, but some of the formatting of the way the draft presents itself here are a little bit tricky to read. So I just wanted to point that out and be happy to answer any questions regarding how that is appearing in the report.
I think maybe what would be helpful for me looking at this is if the yes and yes with conditions were next to each other and then no was separated. Because in my mind, yes and yes with conditions should be grouped, because essentially that's a kind of a positive feeling about it. Not that they should necessarily be added together, but I'd like to see the overall positive versus a no, absolutely no. I think that would be easier to see and read based on how that question's asked.
Okay. Great, that's helpful feedback, Rebecca, thank you. Yeah, and so then reading down, you can see here kind of in our, we included a palette of light commercial uses that might be appropriate in the downtown neighborhood. And we did get yeses on most of these, a civic space, a home occupation, religious land use, which there are some in the downtown neighborhood area already, a small business office, of course, these would be defined in the draft that Reese just went over with you all. Boutique restaurant or coffee shop, hair or nail salon, single family residence converted to retail or commercial. So as you can see here, those came in more yes than yes with conditions. So I think that was really helpful to us to see what uses are really appropriate. So now we kind of have an idea of the forms and the densities and the uses and all these uses, like I said, play out in that use standards chapter that Reese just went over with you. Where the other pieces come into play are we can develop standards in the zoning district chapter or in the development standards chapter. Either way that we would, have stipulations in there that would state, if you're building a home in the downtown neighborhood, you need to have a front porch of X size that sticks out from the building of X size or whatnot. The dimensional standards, we have dimensional standards in the zoning chapter that give you your setbacks and height regulations. And so that's where we could kind of cap that at a 2-story with an improved attic, but not a 3-story building. So some of those kind of pieces can come into play in that zoning chapter, just to be a little bit more specific on what the kind of desired forms and characters are for the downtown neighborhood. So that's how this questionnaire is really informing that area. And I know you guys are running right up against your meeting time here now. So so any questions in our last minute or so, or do we want to just continue talking about this after? Tim, yes.
I have a quick question. Yeah, I mean, I was really glad this was included. For a town of our size, is this a reasonable response? It looks like you got some pretty nuanced or granular information that indicates, I think the pictures really help for people to go, oh, that's what they're talking about. So do you think the response was good? I mean, I've read this over and it seemed like it had some good information in it.
Yeah, I do feel like that's a decent response rate for the size of community, especially for code-related questionnaires. I would say we usually see something in the 100 to 200 range. We aren't getting, huge response rates on a lot of this stuff. So I was actually really pleased when we got into the hundreds. Because it started out slow. We were getting like 40 responses and we weren't getting any more for a few days. So we pushed it out on social media and had a little spike, and that made me feel a lot better that we're getting, and as you saw from the write-in comments, we're getting really constructive feedback from some of the open-ended answers as well.
Thank you very much.
Yeah, absolutely. All right, Cody, do you want Reese and I to kind of hang tight and come back in after your regular meeting? Or
yeah, I think it would be advisable, and maybe it was just prior to when you were able to join us, Jen, but we had kind of suggested that our agenda for the regular meeting is relatively short. We've got minutes, election of officers, and presentation from the town attorney regarding the possible changes that are being considered to the planning commission membership. So I believe it should go fairly quickly. If you and Reese don't mind hanging on, then we can at least come back and have a little bit of discussion on some of these items from the work session.
Sounds like a plan.
All right, appreciate you guys sticking around. So Chairman McCaffrey, my clock is showing 6:29, which is pretty darn close if we waited a few more seconds, or we can go ahead and begin the regular meeting.
Does anybody want to take a break or just want to get going?
Just keep going.
Just keep going. All right. Well, I guess it's not quite 6:30, so give it one more minute here and then we'll get her going. Cody's got his helper there with him.
I have two helpers, and they're supposed to be watching a movie. So far it's been working relatively well.
Well, Alabama's leading 3-0 now. All right, 6:30. Let's call the Planning Commission meeting for January 10th to order. Roll call, please.
Commissioner Kinney,
Present.
Whitehouse,
Here.
Hammond,
Here.
Knack,
Here.
Sarter,
Here.
Friedrichs. Barry, are you there?
I'm here.
Okay, McCaffrey.
Present. Thank you. All right, any additions or deletions to the agenda? And then we'll move on.
No additions from staff.
Public. Okay, good deal. Public forum? You have anybody, Patty?
No one has raised their hand.
All right, move on to consideration of minutes, please. We have a motion to accept the minutes from last meeting. I won't forget about them this time.
I make a motion, we approve the minutes from, what day is it? Where are we?
December 6th.
December 6th.
December 6th, please. Sorry about that.
Do we have a second?
Second.
Eric seconded. Roll
Yeah.
call, please.
Commissioner Keeney,
Yes.
Whitehouse,
Yes.
Hammond,
Yes.
Knack,
Yes.
Sarter,
Yes.
Friedrichs,
Hello, Bear.
You're on mute, Barry, if you're able to respond. We didn't hear you. We saw you unmute, but we didn't hear anything.
I guess we have enough votes without him.
okay, McCaffrey.
Yes.
Okay.
All right, new business, election of officers. I think some of you heard that I kind of want to get out of this thing after almost 17 years. So with that in mind, I would like to nominate Eric Sarter as the chairman.
Commissioner
Second that.
Sarter?
Guess you're alone, Bert.
I think that's a great idea, but Bert keeps saying he wants out of it, but I just don't know. Does he really?
I don't know.
Give me a couple months.
I think Eric would
I'll
do a
hang on
great,
for a couple months.
I think
Bert,
Eric
when-
would do a great job.
When are your term,
I
when
do
is your
too.
term up, Bert?
I have no idea, but 16 and a half years is long enough.
They all bleed together after that long, don't they?
We need to get new blood on here.
Just real quick, I believe to answer the question, Chairman McCaffrey, your term was appointed until 2024. We can reconfirm that, but I'm fairly sure that's accurate. And going back, I heard a nomination and a second for Commissioner Sarter for the chair position. Commissioner Sarter, do you accept the nomination?
I do.
Thank you. Are there any other nominations?
No. We don't need a roll call for that, do we?
We do. We need to vote to confirm it. Yes.
All right, let's do a roll call then.
Commissioner Keeney,
Yes.
Whitehouse,
Yes.
Hammond,
Yes.
Knack,
Yes.
Sarter,
Yes.
Friedrichs, McCaffrey,
There he is. There he is.
Yes,
There's Bear.
Bear, were you in on that? I guess you're elected, Eric.
Looks like it, huh?
I know you do a great job.
Thank you, guys. I appreciate it.
You bet.
Now we need the the pro tem, right?
That's correct. It's vice chair in the terms of the planning
Vice chair.
commission, but it's the same role. Absolutely.
I'd like to nominate Linda Knack.
Second.
Linda, do you accept?
We didn't talk about this.
Well,
I'll accept. Yes. Eric, I anticipate you being there every time.
So far, so good. I think your job will be pretty easy.
Okay.
All right, roll call, please.
Commissioner Keeney,
Yes.
Were there any other nominations? I'm sorry to interrupt.
I'm sorry.
Were there any other nominations for the role of vice chair? Okay.
Nope.
carry on. Thank you.
Commissioner Kinney,
Yes.
Whitehouse,
Yes.
Hammond,
Yes.
Knack,
Yes.
Sarter,
Yes.
Friedrichs, McCaffrey,
Yes.
Mr. Byrd, good catch on that procedurally. Thank you.
You know me, I'm gonna be precise. Sorry to be a pain.
All right. Congratulations, you two.
Thank you, sir.
Congratulations. Just again, procedurally, those elections will take effect at the next regular meeting. So Commissioner McCaffrey, you're still on the hook for the rest of the meeting, and then Commissioner Sarter can take over in February. And just procedurally too, it's often a lot of other boards and commissions appoint or elect a secretary. Just to point out, town staff performs the role of secretary, takes the notes, keeps the records and things of that nature. So no election is required for that seat. We'll take care of that for you and provide all the records upon request.
Good. Thank you, Mr. Byrd.
I'd like to add
All right.
that Eric, I hope that Eric, you can exceed Bert's time in your position. I'm looking forward to it.
That
Maybe
might
you
be
can
a
hit,
world
maybe you can hit
record for-
20 years. I mean, Bert kind of bailed out a little early. He's a quitter.
Nice send off.
It's a long time. All right, so we move on to B. Whatever that is, Cody.
Yeah, I want to do a real quick informal introduction. I don't believe that our town attorney's office, represented by Dan Sapienza tonight, has been in front of the Planning Commission. So very briefly, Dan Sapienza works for March and Olive, which is the town's legal counsel. And without any further ado, I'm going to hand it over to Dan to present this next topic.
Thanks, Cody. So I'm here tonight to present a draft ordinance to you. And really what I'm looking for is feedback from the Planning Commission and feedback tonight here in person. And Cody, please give everyone my email address. And I definitely would welcome written comment later. We want your input on this proposal. My name is Dan Sapienza. I work for Brad March at March and Olive. Our firm serves as the town attorney for the town of Wellington. In late summer, early fall, roughly, the Board of Trustees held a work session, and a major part of that major discussion was on the makeup of various commissions and advisory boards of the town of Wellington. Each advisory board, each commission, whether it's statutorily required or it's a more informal thing or something just in the town of Wellington, each one has its own membership requirements and rules for how meetings are held, and kind of a hodgepodge. And that's partially because these have been developed over a long period of time, and each one as it's developed, they pull in language from somewhere. So one of the things we're trying to do is standardize some of the language around these boards and commissions. Not making real substantive changes to a lot of them, except when it comes to membership. Some of our boards and commissions allow non-residents of the town of Wellington to participate in various ways. So there's a lot of discussion at the board about the appropriateness of that for various roles. When it comes to the Planning Commission itself, really the only major changes that were discussed before the Board of Trustees was membership on this board, and changing that from its current makeup that includes, is it 2 members of the Board of Trustees and an alternate, or is it 3? Is it 3? So changing that to not allowing or not having any members of the Board of Trustees on the Planning Commission itself. So the Planning Commission would be 7 residents of the town of Wellington. No member of the board or no trustee would attend these meetings nor participate in them. This is really a best practice, as appeals might come before the Board of Trustees. So when they receive information here at the Planning Commission, want to make sure that isn't carried over to the meetings of the Board of Trustees. We'll make sure everything that's presented there is all that's considered if something gets appealed. But as we were thinking about membership and eliminating potentially 3 members of this board, got thinking about how to fill up the 7 members. You know, do we need to go out and get 3 additional people? We always have a lot of trouble in the town getting people to participate in various boards. So one of the proposals was to potentially merge the Board of Adjustments and the Planning Commission. Now they would remain 2 different boards, 2 separate entities, except right now, no member of the Planning Commission can be on another voting board. So the idea was actually allowing Planning Commission members to be on the Board of Adjustments and allowing Board of Adjustments members to be on the Planning Commission, so we could explore combining those 2. And big idea there was members of this commission have the expertise and the knowledge that we really could use on the Board of Adjustments. But that's really the substantive changes. There's a number of other language changes in the proposed ordinance that was in your packet. I think it starts on page 59 or 60, something like that. But a lot of the other language changes is intended just to kind of standardize. So what I'd love to hear from you is your thoughts. We wanted to make sure that we had your input before going to the Board of Trustees with a proposed ordinance. So that's it really quickly, but I'm happy to answer any questions and I'd love to hear your feedback.
Hey, it's Linda. I guess I would like a little bit more information on as to actually what the Board of Adjustments is doing and does.
I think Cody is the perfect person to answer those questions.
Sure thing. Thanks, Dan, and thanks to Commissioner Knack for the question. The Board of Adjustments is really similar in nature to the Planning Commission in that they have to know all of the current codes and how the codes operate and what they mean. The matters that are presented to the Board of Adjustment are really kind of threefold. One, they get kind of the variances, which is what I call the gray area. It's meaning that some application or provision of the code has caused an applicant or an owner the inability to do something which they feel may otherwise should be allowed. And so for a variance, the Board of Adjustments considers a couple of factors that help determine whether or not that individual owner on a case-by-case basis should or should not be allowed to do what they're asking for as not an exemption, but an allowance from the code to proceed where the code may otherwise say they can't. Another factor that the Board of Adjustments looks at is if there's a decision made by an administrative official of the town, such as your planning director, if there's kind of a grievance filed by the applicant that says, I disagree with the interpretation of the planning director, I disagree with the decision that was made, then that applicant can appeal that decision to the Board of Adjustments. And the Board of Adjustments would hear that, they'd be presented with the facts of the case, and then the Board of Adjustments as a collective body and a board can decide to either decide with the decision of the administrative official, they can overrule the power of the administrative official, or they can attach such other conditions of approval as they see fit to fulfill the spirit and intent of the regulations. So they do variances, they do appeals of an administrative official. Wellington's Board of Adjustments also serves as I'd call it the Board of Construction Appeals. If there's a building code that comes into play, that again is if an applicant feels they've been aggrieved by a decision of the building official and would like to appeal that or seek some form of alternative means or methods, that could be presented to the Board of Adjustments for consideration. And again, the board would have the same powers as the official from which the appeal is taken. I said 3, and then I'm going to throw a 4th one in there. The Board of Adjustments also serves as the variance board for floodplain considerations. So if the floodplain regulations say that an owner isn't able to do something, that owner can present their variance request regarding floodplain to the Board of Adjustments. The Board of Adjustments is presented with staff reports very similar in nature to the Planning Commission. It includes all the applicant's information, pertinent information needed to evaluate the code requirements, and staff will provide an opinion of these are the things that the Board of Adjustments might want to consider in hearing the requests. That's probably more detail than you wanted or needed, but that's those are the things that are typically presented to the Board of Adjustments. The last thing I'd throw out there is that the Board of Adjustments decisions are final. There's no appeal process to the Board of Adjustments. The only way to appeal a Board of Adjustments decision is to go to court to decide or to continue that conversation.
I think I would add, as a somewhat practical matter with the Board of Adjustments, I believe the last meeting of the Board of Adjustments was in June. Is that correct, Cody?
I believe that's correct.
It is an incredibly important job, an important organization for the town, and Cody listed up all the many responsibilities of it. But as a practical matter for members of this commission and members of the Board of Adjustments, it doesn't meet as often. It is when appeals come up. And that's actually why it's really important, or can be very beneficial for members of the Planning Commission to be on the Board of Adjustments, because as members of the Planning Commission, you're involved in a much more regular basis with town code, with the workings of the town. And so when those appeals, when those one-off meetings happen, if there is joint membership, then it can really bring the expertise of this body over there. So that's as a kind of, in thinking about the time of the individuals, and for the town, that also presents a problem of appointing people to the Board of Adjustments. I think it's currently has 4 members. It's down 1 member, I believe, at the moment, and it has 2 Board of Trustees members as alternates in it. So, but that would be a way to help make sure that both boards have full membership.
I have a question. So the Board of Adjustment, I think the 2 trustees are alternates. Are they also going to be removed in a similar manner to this? Is that a future action?
That would be a future ordinance that we need to get in front of the Board of Adjustments. I mean, that would be the proposal. And that's why in the ordinance that's in front of you right now, or this proposed ordinance, it actually is, it's relatively permissive. It essentially says, right, if this were to pass, that members of the Planning Commission may be members of the Board of Adjustments. And so we'll change that one in the future, potentially, if the town Board of Trustees decides to change this one. So, but yeah, that would be the proposal.
So I had another question regarding what Mr. Byrd said about, so the Board of Adjustments looks into floodplain issues. Is that not FEMA, or who establishes? I mean, I know FEMA establishes floodplains, but I didn't realize the town had any ability to modify. I guess I don't understand how they might do that, because again, it sounds like a federal map, and I don't know how you would, I mean, like, obviously you could appeal the process, but I guess I'm a little unclear about that aspect.
Yeah, so that's a great question, Commissioner Whitehouse. On floodplain related matters, it's not an appeal of the floodplain boundaries. It's not an interpretation of the floodplain boundaries. It has nothing to do with the federal act of identifying what is in or is not within a regulated floodplain or floodway. What it's really, the process for a variance that the Board of Adjustments would hear would be if the floodplain regulations that are adopted by the town, which are in the zoning code, or traditionally are in the zoning code, it's an appeal to those provisions. So if our code says you must elevate a shed by 3 feet above the base flood elevation, and the federal regulations don't require that, then they may come in and appeal the decision of the town on that factor. It may also be anchoring requirements for a shed to resist flotation. There's federally regulated components of that, and there's locally regulated components of that. So it's not a question of where the floodplain lies or whether they're in or out. It's a question of within the floodplain where certain activities are allowed, if there's a local regulation that prevents them from otherwise doing what they would like to do, there's a process in place to allow that consideration.
Thank you for your clarification.
Absolutely.
So on the wording of this, is it going to specify that 2 planning commission members can be on that board and 2 can be on the planning commission board, or how not that they meet all the time, but you know, the potential for burnout being on too many boards?
The intent is actually, or maybe I shouldn't say the intent, but the idea is actually that the 7 members of the Planning Commission would also be the 7 members of the Board of Adjustments. A lot of communities do it this way. And the Board of Adjustments, because it meets so infrequently or irregularly, it's not like really being on 2 full-time boards. But the intent would actually be to have complete crossover of membership. So if there was a Board of Adjustments meeting, it could be scheduled with a Planning Commission meeting or after it, I suppose. But
yeah, and Dan, I don't want to cut you off, but that's exactly how it's worked in other communities that I've worked in. Because of the infrequency in which the Board of Adjustments met, we would just, when we did have a case to be considered, we would schedule it right before the regular Planning Commission meeting, hear the variance request, reach that conclusion, and then adjourn and then reconvene as the Planning Commission. So it didn't really affect the number of nights or the number of meetings. This was just one extra report and an extra minutes to approve on a regular night.
So what would happen? So if somebody goes to the variance because of something the Planning Commission has changed or approved, how does that work? If you've got the Planning Commission as part of the other board.
So if I understand,
well,
if I understand your question correctly, and you can tell me if I'm mishearing you, but I believe the answer to the question is that there are no decisions of the Planning Commission that are appealable to the Board of Adjustments. The Board of Adjustments hears matters that are decided by your administration or your staff.
Okay.
That was my question too. I felt like that was a conflict. So same procedure of Board of Adjustments, then does that, if there's something to do on the Board of Adjustments, and does that then go to the trustees? Or is the Board of Adjustments kind of the decision of that appeal?
Everything referred to the Board of Adjustments, their decision is final unless it's appealed to district court. So there's no the Board of Adjustments they're not advisory. They don't forward anything to the Board of Trustees or any other board or commission. That all of their decisions and actions are final unless the applicant chooses to take it to court.
Okay.
So may I ask a question then? Are we entertaining this idea because of the lack of participation we might get to fill the vacancies on the Planning Commission?
there's a couple reasons to consider this. One is the lack of interest in filling some of the vacancies on the Board of Adjustments. The second is with the Planning Commission, there's currently 7 members of the Planning Commission, and part of this proposal is removing 3 of those members of the Planning Commission who are the members of the Board of Trustees. So we're actually about to take the alternates, if this ordinance were to pass and the proposed potential changes to the Board of Adjustments, that would remove 3 of 7 members from the Planning Commission, and that would also remove the 2 alternates out of 7. So 2 of the 7 members of the Board of Adjustments who are currently the Board of Trustees members. So we'd actually have reduced the number of both boards that are currently filled. So as we're thinking about, already we have a vacancy over in the Board of Adjustments that hasn't been filled, potentially about to create more vacancies here on the Planning Commission. It actually makes a lot of sense to get people who are interested in being involved in the community, into one board that can take care of all those things. It's not one board, and that's something that I keep kind of slipping on, and I see Cody's eyes kind of light up whenever I say that, and that is, it is very distinctly two different committees. Just membership will be the same on both of them, and that's really just a proposal, and in this proposed ordinance, it even says they may be members. So I think it's something worth exploring, and if it works, great.
I see a scenario where maybe there's only one person from that committee, from the Board of Adjustments, that even wants to be on the Planning Commission and meet every single month.
Bert, that was my question. Have the non-trustee members of the current Board of Adjustments been made aware of this potential merger, and what's the feedback from that side? It's quite the switch to go from saying, oh, we only meet once every 6 months as the Board of Adjustments to, oh, by the way, now you're doing a meeting every month and it takes 3 hours.
As noted at the beginning of my presentation and in my memo, this was discussed with the Board of Trustees in late summer, fall, and Board of Adjustments hasn't met since June. So no, this hasn't been discussed with them yet. But I think even if we get pushback there, the proposal here for the Planning Commission would be to allow it. And so we could actually start with members of the Planning Commission if they're interested in joining the Board of Adjustments. We could have some movement there, and because we all currently have one vacancy on the Board of Adjustments, and then we'll discuss this with the current members of the Board of Adjustments and see their interest. But there's nothing requiring the membership to be the same, but this change that we're proposing would allow it to happen. It could happen slowly, it could happen all at once, but yeah, we'll discuss this with the Board of Adjustments before we start changing membership on the Board of Adjustments.
I have a question. So the Board of Adjustments is also an appointed, just like the Planning Commission, correct?
That's correct.
Yep. And that was the point that I was going to make. And Dan, you can elaborate if you feel the need to. But the possibilities that we're discussing tonight, if adopted by the Board of Trustees, would still require the appointments. An appointment typically requires a willing party. So if a current member of the Board of Adjustments wasn't able to or willing to serve as a planning commissioner as well, then that appointment wouldn't have to be made to both boards. There could still be, it's still at the discretion of the people willing to serve and the appointment of the Board of Trustees.
So when this is approved, how soon will it go into effect? And how will we operate that if we don't get enough people right away? Or continue to do it the way we're doing it now until it's...
The proposal, which isn't spelled out in the draft that's in front of you, but what we're proposing and what we're, I suppose, planning on doing is taking this to the Board of Trustees in the next couple weeks. Well, not couple, maybe 2 weeks, but maybe not until February. But not having any changes take effect until after this spring's election for the town of Wellington. And that's a perfect transition point, because after every election, the Board of Trustees members that are on various, that are on the Planning Commission, or the alternates that are on the Board of Adjustments, that they would cycle off anyway. And so that creates kind of a point for us to change those. So April is the short answer to your question.
I just want to make one note. I really appreciate all the time that our trustees are putting in, and they usually do have multiple meetings. However, I will say on the Planning Commission, I really appreciate having some of your background and knowledge on some of these topics. I mean, you are able to give us some information. Cody does too, really well, but I do appreciate that from a board perspective. That enhances this Planning Commission. So that it's a little fearful for me to go, okay, see ya. But also it does feel a little heavy having 3 of y'all here, if that makes sense.
Any discussion about just reducing it to 1 as opposed to eliminating all trustees? Because they're valuable insight from trustees on these Planning Commission meetings. I was served on Parks Advisory Board as well, and it was 1 trustee, and there is an upside to having a trustee present on these commissions and boards outside of their trustee position.
There was some discussion of that, and I think there may continue to be discussion of that as we take this back to the Board of Trustees if we get there. But one of the major concerns with having the trustees here is the decisions of the Planning Commission are then appealed to the Board of Trustees. And so when an issue comes before the Board of Trustees, they need to be evaluating that topic, that appeal, based on the evidence that's in front of them there. And from a legal standpoint, it's actually a real concern to have trustees that are here at the Planning Commission, hearing everything that's heard here and a part of this discussion at the Planning Commission, then going up to hear an appeal of their own decision. There's issues on that on kind of an appeal or even a conflict sort of, it's conflict of interest. Am I appealing my own decision? But also it's really about the facts, the evidence that's presented. And so they need to listen to the evidence that's presented at the Board of Trustees and not bring in this other evidence here. So it's actually in many communities, and I would say most communities around the country, a board or a city council, board, those members don't also sit on planning commissions. So Wellington's kind of unusual. And what's complicated is the current setup, which is that the mayor is here and 2 members of the board. That's actually the default in Colorado statute. So when you have a statutory town like the town of Wellington, the current makeup of the planning commission is the default, which inherently presents a conflict that most communities try to avoid. And so what our concern was is if we reduced it to a single member of the board being here, that we're both varying from the state statute default, yet we're not eliminating really the concern that we have for that conflict. And so really the clearest way to do it is to have separate membership entirely. And that's what Cody's here for and what staff's here for, is to help the planning commission understand what's going on at the board level and at the town, also to help the town board understand what's happening at the planning commission. So having Cody here to serve as that liaison rather than having those members here themselves. But Cody, I apologize, I'm long-winded tonight.
No, that's all right. It's good discussion, and I wasn't sure how many questions would come up tonight, so I'm glad that the dialogue is happening. I hope it's beneficial for everyone as it is for me. One of the things I'd throw out there too, regarding the concern that some of the expertise or information from the Board of Trustees could be lost. There are actually already provisions in place in our current code, and we would like to continue to beef that up a little bit more in the code update, if you will. But matters that are referred to the Planning Commission that go on to the Board of Trustees, the Board of Trustees can refer those matters back. So if there's the Board of Trustees can say, we've heard the recommendation of the Planning Commission. We have this additional consideration or insight or other factors that we want the Planning Commission to weigh in on. They can send it back to the Planning Commission to think about those specific items. And then the Planning Commission can consider it and send it back to the Board of Trustees with a new recommendation or the same recommendation. But there are procedures in place that allow for that interaction between the Planning Commission and the board. It just happens in a defined set of procedures that don't call into question the substantive due process, where you might have the Board of Trustees member on the Planning Commission advising themselves, as Dan described really well. So there's a couple of different ways to look at it. But I did want to highlight the fact that there are some other procedures that are already in existence that kind of help facilitate those conversations without violating a procedural element.
Well, I think based on legalities, regardless of how some of us board members may feel or not feel, the board's probably going to pass it anyway. So we probably need to get used to it based on legalities. So nice of you to share it with us, but we know it's going to pass anyway. So.
Well, I did have another question, and I think Dan mentioned it, that I think he said early on his presentation that the trustees shouldn't even be attending the planning commission, I was scanning through. If I completely missed that provision in the proposed ordinance that the trustees should not even be attending planning. I know in some municipalities that isn't the case. So
that's not something that's in the ordinance, no, and I wouldn't think it's appropriate to have in terms of our town code saying what the members of the board of trustees can and can't do or should and shouldn't do like that. That's something that will, if this change happens, if this ordinance does pass, that's certainly something that we will talk with the members of the board of trustees about. I mean, and kind of in how this all works going forward, but it wouldn't be in the ordinance.
okay, thank you for the clarification.
One, if you don't mind, yeah, I do think that the Board of Trustees is going to pass this. I, for one, not very thrilled with it. I see a lot of value in us being a part of the Planning Commission. I see a lot of groundwork that's done ahead of time that otherwise could get bogged down, you know, the learning process, the learning curve. And I think there's value in that. I mean, but I do see the other side of all of it. I get all of it. I mean, we've been operating this way for a long time, state statute. There's nothing illegal about it. So, you know, I don't mind being a part as a mayor, being a part of it, so I can see what interest is coming to town, so I can have some foreknowledge on the ground of what's coming up. I think there's a value in that, not to sway decisions or anything like that, but I just, you know, I think that personally, I think there's value in having, you know, a couple of trustees, maybe not three, one or two on the board, to just be get that comprehensive knowledge. And but then again, you know, I'm not going to fight about it either. So it's just what I'm saying.
I would maybe suggest that if this ordinance does pass and the other ordinances where we're removing members of the board of trustees from so many of these various boards and commissions, that actually offers an opportunity for the members of this planning commission to be more engaged with the board of trustees, to have more of a process at the board of trustees level for regular updates from this commission. You know, so having the new chair, Eric, showing up to coming to board of trustees meetings to give an update perhaps on planning commission. So maybe this offers an opportunity to formalize that process where it's not just the three members of the planning commission that are, or the board of trustees that are also on the planning commission that get this information and some of the background of what's coming up, but maybe it offers an opportunity to really facilitate education of the whole board of trustees, not just for this commission, but for all of the advisory boards. Just making sure that there's regular feedback for all those organizations.
I agree. I think I agree with Mayor Hammond on a lot of those things because I really have enjoyed being a planning commissioner. Also, I think it should be like a prerequisite, loosely, not of course required, but to become a trustee, because the knowledge that you gain on this commission is way beyond, I think, the preparation a lot of trustees get upon serving. So, but with that said, I think this is really good timing to do this. And the reason why is upon adoption of a new land use code where everything is clean, clear, follows the vision that we've determined through multiple years of all of us together, this group here, working to design and recommend the land use code. That is a great time, I think, to break away because it isn't necessarily based off of our historical knowledge at that point. It's based on the brand new code that's in front of you, which will be the brand new code for anybody, us included, even though we've been here for a long time. So I think this is a fantastic opportunity to make this break very cleanly, and a really good opportunity, of course, to adopt and the land use code, and then have everybody have a very clear expectations and knowledge of the code in front of them. So this is a great opportunity for everybody to learn because the code will be new for the brand new members and for us alike. So I think it's a great opportunity, but I have very much enjoyed being a planning commissioner. And so that's something I would definitely miss, but I know it's in good hands, so I'm not worried about that at all.
And to that point, I would have liked to have made this change before the land use code stuff came up. Okay.
As I said at the beginning, I'd like Cody to make sure everybody has my email address. If there's any feedback, anything, please send it to me. Anything you didn't share this evening. I expect that we'll take this to the Board of Trustees in the next month. If not the next meeting, one of those first meetings in February, the first meeting in February, probably. So we definitely want to make sure we receive as much feedback as possible. So.
Any other questions for Dan? Okay, well, as he suggested, I'll send an email to our planning commissioners with Dan's email information. So if you have further thoughts, ideas, or questions, you can send those along. Thanks so much, Dan. Appreciate you coming to our meeting tonight.
Thanks, Dan.
Thanks.
All right, I will move on. Any announcements, Cody?
I don't have any announcements. I don't currently have any applications that would require planning commission action for February. So our plan would be to continue with the work sessions on the land use code updates.
All right. Anybody have anything else? Hearing not, it's 7:12. We'll adjourn this meeting. We go back to the work session. Meeting adjourned. Thank you. Jen, you there?
Yes, I am. Can you guys hear me?
We can.
Yes.
Okay,
Fire
because I
away.
took my headphones out.
So I think, do you want to pick up where we left off when we started the regular meeting with the downtown neighborhoods questionnaire?
Yes.
Okay.
So I pretty much went through kind of the overview of what we heard and how we would potentially apply that. So I guess I'd like to open to any additional questions you guys have. And then we can talk a little bit about what those standards might look like that we would incorporate into the design standards section. So were there any questions or thoughts?
I mean, I do have a question. I think when we were
Sure.
discussing the section on porches, I mean, can you in fact, can we require that someone has a front porch? Just out of curiosity. I think a front porch is a great amenity. And I lived in a bungalow in down in Fort Collins, and it was great. All the bungalows the building lines were set up, and you could sit on your porch and look down sort of that little more private space and see your other neighbors sitting on their front porch, which I thought was I always thought that was pretty nice, so my personal opinion I think they're a value, but is that something that we could require of someone building in this area?
We can, and Jen, I'll kick it back over to you here in just a second. Sure. I wanted to real quickly point out, and I can't emphasize enough that if we do choose to put regulations in place that require things such as a front porch or roof line variation or other things of that nature, it would be for new developments or significant redevelopments, not for an existing homeowner. We're not going to require someone who has an existing home to suddenly one day you have to put a front porch on it. Not what we're intending whatsoever. It would be for new development and redevelopment, underscored. And the purpose of that would be to help new development and redevelopment to fit within the existing character and nature of the surrounding environs. That's your general purpose statement, that we don't want to lose the character of our downtown neighborhoods by not putting some controls in place for what those new and redevelopment projects might look like. I hope I said that succinctly enough that it makes sense to everyone, that it's for anything new.
Yeah, and I'm glad you reiterated that, because obviously none of this stuff is ex post facto. You can't go, well, we changed the rule and now you have to comply to a rule that you had a pre-existing. I was just curious, but thank you for clarifying that.
Absolutely, and I'll underscore as well that the typically with any regulation, you want to put that regulation in place with in your back of your minds, what is the governmental interest in regulating that particular requirement? And in this case, we're basing this, we need to continue to flesh out what regulations might look like, but the basis for requiring any kind of regulation regarding what the architectural elements might be for a new development or redevelopment project is based on the feedback that we heard very adamantly in the comprehensive plan process, that there is an existing character and nature of the downtown neighborhoods that we don't want to lose. And so that preserving that nature, that character is the intent of these regulations, and they should be tailored very narrowly to achieve that intent and nothing more. Jen, I kind of butted in because I saw you were about to respond, and I wanted to throw that out there, but now I want to turn it back over to you.
Oh, that was a great addition, Cody. Thank you. And yeah, we can require porches. We can even go down to, a minimum size and just say, they don't have to be giant porches, but they can be giant porches, but we're just looking for, a minimum of a certain square footage with a certain depth. It's very, very typical to do that. We don't have to go into any more detail than that. They don't have to have specific railings or anything. It can be an open porch or whatnot, but just getting that kind of architectural feature off of the front. And the downtown neighborhoods are primarily alley loaded. But if someone were to put in a front loaded building for whatever reason, which means your garage is on the front rather than on the rear, we can even put in regulations that would just require that garage to be set back. It can even be, 2 feet behind the front facade. We can put things like that into play that prohibit kind of that snout garage look of the 90s. Yeah, I'd like to kind of put it out there to you guys. Does it sound like it sounds like from everything that we've heard so far that there is an appetite for putting together some basic standards to give those kind of forms and character features, to try to describe that craftsman Victorian farmhouse style. We don't have to say it has to be craftsman Victorian or farmhouse, but we can kind of write in some of those materials. We're looking for, the farmhouse has that board on batten where it's the little strips on the board. So we can write in kind of material preferences. Even though the rooftops weren't, there wasn't kind of a real driving answer on those, we can say, the preferences to more of the gabled and hipped roofs versus kind of shed roofs or more modern design. So we can kind of write this language with descriptors that get you towards that craftsman Victorian farmhouse front porch 2-story kind of look. Does that sound good that we can put that together and bring it back to you all for a review?
I think that's a great idea. One concern I have about the porches is regarding setbacks and where porches can start and end.
Mm-hmm.
Our lots are small. So my concern is that if there is requirements for porches and then also extended setback space, that it really limits the size of building you can put on a lot. So I would say that if there is a requirement for porch, so it would reconsider shortening the setback in the front of the house. Or I don't know how that would work exactly. I would just hate to say, yeah, we have to have porches, but then therefore all these houses will have to be smaller. Because if somebody does want to do a bigger house or, just a ranch house and that sprawls and is bigger than the footprint of other houses, I would hate for them to be limited and not want to build or improve a home downtown because they can't get the size of house that they want. So I definitely want to leave it open for significant improvement on homes if possible.
Right.
Point well taken, Commissioner Kinney. And I'm really glad that you brought that up. At least initially, what I've done in the past in older neighborhoods or historic neighborhoods, what I would propose is a starting point, and you can give us feedback now, or we can draft it up and bring it back to you and you can review it. But the starting point I would propose is having 2 setbacks, one defined for what is the front wall of the principal structure, and the second one defining the limits of a front porch if it's required, but you don't want it to come all the way out to the street. So you might have a front principal structure wall setback of 20 feet and a front porch setback of 10 feet or some other dimensional requirements, and we can look at what might be appropriate for existing uses. But that's what I would initially propose, is having 2 setbacks, one for the building wall, one for the porch.
I think that's great.
Yeah, I
That's
would like
exactly what
to,
I was gonna say, Cody. So you and I are on the same page.
so I was gonna say regarding porches, I mean, I'm sure both of, well, all the people in the planning area are familiar with the pattern language, because they definitely had some discussion about what makes an effective porch, because I've certainly seen porches that are 4 feet wide and nobody uses them because the space is unusable, but they have the amenity on the front, but it's not functional. So I mean, that would be, one of the things they do think about, because there are definitely some sizes that actually they go through that and say, these work really well and these don't. So I'm sure he'll look at that to inform your decisions. That's an interesting book, I find.
I really like the idea that you guys brought up too. And that's funny because that's my porch. Commissioner, my house is completely non-functioning. It's just a stoop. But I think the cool thing is if there were parameters for setbacks for porches versus the front of the property, that somebody who really just wants to improve the facade of their existing house without doing significant improvements can do a lot of that through a nice porch too. So we can really improve some visuals on houses that don't need a lot of improvement, but would be able to add a porch and add whatever kind of structural interest into their house that way. So I think that would be really cool.
Yeah, fair enough. And just to kind of build off of that too, Commissioner Kinney, you brought up something that I think is worth mentioning, that if someone was doing, just like you said, just a renovation or a facade improvement and wanted to add a front porch, currently our requirements may be restrictive in the sense that they would have to adhere to the current setback requirements. So this could enable homeowners to do more with their existing residents. But it may also be beneficial to put some limits to how far they can go. If we want to allow the reinvestment in front porches, additions on existing homes, there probably does still want to be a standard for this is how far you can go, whatever that dimension is. Otherwise, we could be in a situation where for any homeowner who may want to do that would have to go to the Board of Adjustments that we just talked about to obtain a variance. And we don't want to create a situation where we make it a burden on homeowners to make a reasonable investment in their property. And that's why we wanted to have this conversation, make sure we get that the pros and cons dialed into something that's very reasonable for the existing neighborhoods.
Are there any other considerations for alleys for downtown? Like you said, alleys are pretty prominent. Is there any way to make them work better access from alleys? Anything we can do from this perspective?
Do you have any? I think the short answer is yes. We can do a lot of different things. And I saw Jen unmuted, so I'll let you answer too. But I guess, did you have anything specific in mind, Commissioner Kinney, that has been a challenge you've seen in the past, or just the thought-provoking question in general?
Yeah, all I know is mine's pretty hard to use. It's just hard to get into and out of my property from the alley. I scratched my car recently on my fence. It's $1,200. But I was just curious, is there a way, and I see all these like revitalizing downtown alley projects, usually commercially related, to make them beautiful and nice places to see and be and walk. Is that something that could be promoted through in residential areas as well? And if so, how could that be done through land use? Or is there a better use? I feel like they're wasted. I guess that's what I see. I wish we could use them more. It's a nice feature.
Do you guys use your alleys for garbage collection or anything like that?
Yeah, mine does. Not all of them do. Some are very narrow and small, but mine is.
And the garbage trucks actually go down the alley to pick up. Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah, so one thing is looking at setbacks on the alley, and we've done this in communities where if you're going to have a rear loaded garage you need to make sure you have that space to be able to pull out of your garage safely before you get into the alley. And same with like a side loaded, side rear loaded garage. I know that's kind of an odd concept, but that's one way to kind of make sure that when, you know, during future development or redevelopment, you're putting your structures in a good place for safety and clearance and everything. As far as improving the alleys, the code isn't usually the mechanism for that. It's more of a capital improvement project where you guys would decide as a community to say, you know, we want to pave our alleyways, or we want to, you know, make them have some sort of purpose. So that's my experience with alleys is from a codes perspective, really looking at ensuring that a certain clear width is maintained so that you can travel down the alley, and then maintaining certain setbacks on your property. So I don't know, Cody, if you've seen others as well, but.
Well, I don't want to, you know, go down every rabbit hole, but I'll throw out a couple of examples that I've seen in the past that have been effective. Starting with just, you know, generally speaking, alleys are typically platted at 20 feet, sometimes 16 feet. So they're very narrow to begin with. Alleys kind of went out of vogue at a certain point in our history and went to the more traditional front-loaded garage on the front of the house style that we started to see in the 60s and 70s, and got away from alleys. So the developments that have alleys are usually older developments that over time homeowners have erected structures, fences, trash enclosures, other things that maybe there wasn't a lot of thought given to where they went, or maybe there wasn't a lot of oversight from the town to ensure that they were being placed appropriately. So the alley that was already narrow keeps getting narrower and narrower. Things that I've seen effective in the past was establishing a clear setback for any structure that has an overhead garage door. So detached garages, garden sheds, or things that have overhead doors for equipment. A 20-foot setback on those allows enough space for a vehicle to park and not have the vehicle overhang the alley. So if they park in front of the closed garage door, the vehicle doesn't block the alley. Same is true for areas of refuse or garbage collection. Just some basic principles that we know those alleys do get used for garbage and refuse collection. Having a standard that says that the area containing the trash receptacles cannot be in the alley, must be a minimum setback of something very minimal, 2 feet, 5 feet, whatever it is, but to ensure that that those provisions don't narrow up the alley. Some guidance on fences. You know, we know that when you build a fence right up to the property line, alley line, your mirrors become an issue. On your side mirrors, it restricts the alley more so than it does on paper. So having a fence setback has been effective in the past, or at a minimum looking at requirements that a gate cannot swing out into the alley, can only swing into the property, so that gates, when open or when they become disrepair, they don't obstruct the alley. So things of that nature, I think, could really help a lot. The other component that I'd throw out there, which is less of a zoning question or land use code question, but it's in our neighborhood services officers department, which is under planning and development. But how we maintain those alleys. Vegetation has been a really big struggle that limits vehicular access in the alleys. Brush that grows up, weeds that aren't adequately mowed down or maintained. We had a pretty big effort undertaken this last fall with our neighborhood services officer to work with property owners in the downtown or the old town neighborhoods. I don't want to say just the downtown, because the old town neighborhood stretched to Washington and south to Jefferson, and there's alleys all throughout those subdivisions. But we had a pretty big code enforcement effort to help clean up the brush, clean up low-hanging branches, and really try to get alleys cleaned up to maintain access to all users. I would say it was a resounding success, but there's still more to be done. A lot of the trees are bigger, older trees that are more than a homeowner can really take care of on their own. It might take a more coordinated effort to address those bigger issues, but I think that's an element that we need to see continued effort on too. sorry to be so long-winded, but I think that's a really great thought and great idea that needs to be addressed for the town. Other
I was really-
topics? Oh, sorry, Christine.
I was really encouraged of how many people were attracted to the 2-story plus attic. I wasn't sure if that would be the case. I always enjoy buildings that look like that. So and there's some really beautiful ones downtown, like this beautiful Victorian house. That's that model. So I think that was really encouraging to see that people were open to that and that they like seeing that in their downtown. So I think that's great news.
Great. Any other thoughts? Any other, I don't know, considerations that we need to put? I think this has been a really great conversation, and I've jotted down some notes that have already kind of started the framework of some of the pieces that we need to include here. And I love the reference to pattern language. I don't know if you noticed me looking around, but I have that book somewhere around my bookcases here. So that's a great one. Yeah, any other thoughts on the design standards? Or if not, I think we've got a really great start here of what we need to include, and we'll keep putting some language together and get that out to you all for review.
I really appreciate you guys doing the survey. I think that was wonderful, and I'm really glad that we got so much participation.
Yeah, great. Thank you.
Yeah, I mean, I think this has actually been a really productive meeting, and I want to appreciate everybody who's helping us through this, because I mean, even the picture of the terminology of what different parts are. I mean, most people aren't familiar with this, so having a picture like, oh, this is what they're talking. Oh, yeah, I know exactly what that is, but I just didn't know what it was called. So I think that's really helpful. So I think it was a great. I think we learned a lot. I think it's. I think you got a lot of good information that we can move forward with. So thank you.
Great. Thank you.
I would agree. I loved it. It was a good meeting too. I'm just thinking now we need to figure out some grants and things like that we can start building those patios, those porches, right, Rebecca?
By the way,
Those
alleys and porches all over.
Alleys and porches.
Sounds like a great Main Street project.
Ah, there you go. Yeah.
Yeah, that's exciting.
Awesome. I know I missed like the first half of the work session earlier. Do we need to circle back to any of the use conversation? Or did you guys get through that pretty well?
I think I did a lot of presenting, and it maybe didn't allow a lot of room for discussion. So if there are comments that want to be voiced tonight, this would be a good time. Otherwise, feel free, any of the commissioners, if you have thoughts, questions, ideas, feel free to reach out to me. I meet with Jen and Reese weekly to go over the things that we're working on, and we're continually drafting and cycling back and reiterating things so we can work it in. So please reach out to me if you've got ideas or thoughts or questions. Otherwise, if you want to have a quick conversation about them tonight, we can do that as well. And I have my helpers with me.
Your helpers are saying, we got to go to bed, Dad.
Well, yeah, she looks thrilled.
Are we calling her a night?
I think so.
All right. Call it a night. Thanks, guys. Congratulations,
Thank you.
Eric and Linda.
Thank you, sir.
See you guys.
Okay.
Thanks, everyone.
Night.
Good night all.
Appreciate it.
Thank you, everyone. Bye.